The Elk Talk podcast is brought to you by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. To become a member, go to rmef.org.
Welcome to the Elk Talk podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson, presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building that's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BSing, no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record
I
button?
thought I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? Corey, how you doing?
I am doing incredibly great for
Really?
the weather we're having outside.
I'm happy to hear that. What do you guys got going on out there in the weather?
Well, we got about 8 inches of snow 4 days ago, and then it got really cold, so it froze down the snow that had been packed down on my driveway. And then after I spent 2 days plowing it, the first plow every year is always tough because you still have that loose gravel and a little bit of soft dirt here and there.
Yeah.
And so getting that good base for plowing the rest of the winter is important. So we did that, and then it turned off and started raining yesterday, and it warmed up overnight. And so it's just a slushy mess everywhere.
So are you guys in the on the news? They got to use dramatic terms like atmospheric cyclone or whatever the heck they call it. They said Oregon and Washington are getting hit by that. You guys getting hit by that?
I'm not
Is that
sure.
where the rain came from?
We're getting some rain and a little bit of wind, but that's about the extent of my advanced terminology to describe the weather.
Yeah, we still got to have that one lady who's a meteorologist on our podcast.
Yeah.
She could enlighten us on all kinds of terminology and why things happen the way they do. But I spent the last 2 days. I'm the amount of, I don't know what you'd call it, windburn on my cheeks right now. Montana can be windy, and the last 2 days it was really, really windy. And here's the problem, right? The elk are going to bed on the lee side of the hill to get out of the wind. And to glass into that, you got to sit there in the brunt of the wind. Oh, man. It was tough sledding. I'm gonna fess up. If somebody can write a chapter or a course about how to effectively hunt elk in 30 to 40 mile an hour winds, I want to sign up for that course.
Well, I think the most effective thing to do in that situation is stay home.
Now you tell me.
Not only is it tough to find, elk they just aren't going to be up in wind. Like you said, they go and bed down, they tuck themselves away in a place where it's going to be really hard for us to find them. They aren't going to get up and move around. And we have to just sit there and take the brunt of the wind blowing in our face the whole time. And it's just not productive, and it's usually not too enjoyable.
No, it wasn't any of those. Finally, yesterday, so I went up there. Today's Thursday, so I went to the trailhead on Tuesday, and it was still snowing some along with that wind. So my visibility is about 100 feet. But I figured if I did see something, it's going to be in range. And if I saw fresh tracks, the likelihood is whatever made those tracks would still be standing in them. But I didn't see anything. even the squirrels were holding on to the limbs, trying not to get blown out of the trees. So what I did, when you're 4, 5, 6 years old, you're learning what a fort is like, and you get all these wild dreams about building a fort. I felt like I was 6 years old again. I went and took every dead, broken down pine tree top I could find, and I built a fort. And I broke the limb. So it's on this really steep slope. So I can look almost straight out and have a really good view. But I made this little fort and crammed and pushed them down, jumped up on top. So it was really compact and would block the wind. And then I broke out a bunch of limbs in the front, like a window. And I sat in there to try to tough it out the rest of the night, or the rest of the afternoon. But
Did
so
it work?
someone's
Like,
gonna,
did it block the wind?
yeah, to some degree. But then you know what happens? All the debris and pine needles and stuff that are on those dead pine trees, they just blow in your face.
Yeah.
And so
I found without a tarp or something, that wind finds its way through gaps in trees. And it'll cut it down a little bit, but it doesn't make it pleasant.
No, it was, I think, mostly my exercise of how to warm myself back up, because it was about 15 degrees when I was blowing that hard, about 15 inches of snow. But it did help me eliminate where the elk aren't. So I pretty much crossed that entire drainage and the ridge line I walked to get out there. I didn't see a track of anything.
Yeah.
It's like, don't suppose these elk have moved out of here, do you, Randy?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to figure out elk. I figure after 49 years of being on Earth, I should probably start trying to figure out elk behavior a little bit. So I put up, the hard part was I hunted archery and rifle season in Idaho this year.
Mm-hmm.
And they change habits, locations, everything. So we got in and found where a big group of cows had spent the summer, and a good, a quality amount of bulls came into that area in September. And so I put trail cameras up on all these ridges I thought they'd be traveling down, and I caught bulls on just about every trail camera I had out. And I thought, all right, I got them figured out here. Well, then they disappeared like October 15th. Like the bulls disappeared. The cows, I was still seeing little groups of cows here and there, but the bulls disappeared. And so I checked all the trail cameras. There's no bulls on the trail camera. So they didn't go back the same route. I don't know where they went, but they went someplace completely different than where they came from. But about 4 days ago, we got that big snowstorm. And that night, I got one bull that I actually have on the same trail camera on like September 3rd. He came back down moving the same direction. So I think he went back to the same place he was before the rut, but he didn't go back the same path he had got there. So he made a loop somehow. So it's going to be pretty fun, because I think I have 11 trail cameras out, and I'm not a trail camera guy. Like, I don't use them to pinpoint a bull or anything, but it's going to be interesting to see, with that many cameras on strategic ridges that I know these elk are traveling on. I think next year I'm going to have to go across the drainage and put more trail cameras up to see if they leave, if they exit that way and make a big loop and go back up high or what. But there were, I don't know, 7, 8 bulls in this pocket during the rut. And then they all disappeared, went quiet. In fact, the cows, we didn't get hardly any cows on any trail cameras during that time, but I know they were there. They just weren't moving. And then seems like every year the bulls move back down like late November, first part of December. And I don't know where they move down from or how they get there after the rut, but I'm going to put some puzzle pieces together this winter.
Well, you got enough trail cameras out there? Maybe you'll do it. I don't own a trail camera, so maybe I need to come figure out how to use one.
Yeah, I've used them for bear hunting, but I've never really got strategic about using them for elk hunting. And for me, I just want to learn what the elk are doing, where they're coming from, when they're coming down. Because we have a good idea. The bulls stay up higher in the summer. They leave their bachelor groups. They come down and find the cows, they rut, and then they leave and they go into their honey holes. But I just can't figure out where their honey holes are, where their sanctuaries are in late October and early November.
Well, you're hunting some pretty thick country, so
it is.
It's a whole lot easier for an elk to be inconspicuous amongst all those trees and brush and canyons and steep, nasty holes than it is, say, in central Montana or eastern Montana or, the sage flats of Wyoming or these other places where you can see forever.
Yeah.
That's a whole different type of elk that lives where you're at. But, yeah, so then yesterday, thinking I really had it figured out, I'm like, all right, I know where a bunch of elk are on this private ranch. I'm going to go hunt near there. And there's going to be a few elk that stray off there and end up on the public. Well, they did, but they ended up on the landlocked piece of public that I couldn't get to. So I sat on the accessible piece of public looking at them from 1.5 miles away. I wish Montana would, well, maybe I don't wish this, but I'm observing this in Montana. A lot of our units that are over objective, they let you shoot any elk. Some units, even you can go buy a second, they call it a B tag, which is a cow tag. And so the amount of cow elk hunting pressure on public land in a lot of these units is insane. And what does that do to the herd, whether it's bulls or cows? You start shooting at that many elk with all these cow tags, and they head to private.
Yeah.
And we don't shoot any cows when they get on private. So this whole idea that we're over objective, so we got to issue more tags and get, if you drive through town, if you stop at that stoplight, we're going to hand you a cow tag. You don't get to leave town unless you take this cow tag with you, kind of approach in Montana. Well, what it does is it pushes these elk onto these ranches that are owned by very wealthy people. Good for them, they've been successful in life. But they don't allow any hunting. They aren't outfitted. They don't let family hunt. Nobody hunts. They view this as like the Montana version of the zoo.
and it just gets better.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting there thinking, all right, I'm looking at a couple herds of a few hundred cows with a couple groups of bulls, 10, 12 bulls in a group. And those elk probably haven't left those ranches all after the first weekend of season.
Yeah.
So this poor guy over here down a little lower who's running cows trying to make a living, he's enrolled in our block management program. He'd let anybody come and shoot an elk. Well, there aren't any elk there. Because so many people are going there that, and I was sitting on the public up above this place, that's enrolled in this block management program, and the number of people I saw walking that block management program, a couple miles away, there's city parks that don't get that much walking traffic.
Well, it's you see, and everybody knows, I think, that private land is where the elk go when they get pressured. So they see a block management and their first thought is, well, this is private land. This has got to be better than the public land. And maybe it is for a day or two, but when everybody on the public land ends up on the block management, it's public land. I mean, it really is public access, at least. And those elk, they don't know the difference between private and public. They just know the difference between access and no access. And so they go where there's no access.
While I'm sitting there watching all this 4x4 mule deer comes to 200 yards in the morning, and then he does it again in the afternoon. And he's like, "Come on, buddy, you got a tag. I dare you." I didn't shoot him. I didn't grant him his wish, but
why?
I don't know. He looked like a really nice young 4x4.
Gotcha.
That has the potential to really be something if he lives long enough. But since we hunt mule deer in the rut with a rifle in Montana, and this guy was on public land, I don't think he's making it past Thanksgiving. So maybe it's just some weird wish or manufactured dream in my mind that this guy is going to survive and become one of these really nice bucks. So I let him go. But while I was sitting there doing all that, contemplating this, a thought entered my head, and I've proposed this before, but got an awful lot of pushback, that cow elk hunting on public land should be by permit. And if they got too many elk on the private land, you know what? Keep handing out those cow elk tags on private land, because a few of those people will allow hunting. And if they do, they'll disperse those elk, and hopefully some of them will end up on public land. And, let some of the folks hunting public land shoot a cow elk, because that's what a lot of people want to do. So I think I don't have any evidence to show it, other than I've talked to some biologists about it, and they tend to agree that too much pressure, too many cow tags results in a lower harvest than just a moderate controlled number of cow elk tags.
Absolutely.
And so intuitively, you'd think, well, the more cow elk tags we issue, the more cow elk we're going to shoot, the less headache we're going to have. I think you can overdo that.
Yep.
I might be wrong.
I
if
don't
anyone
think
has
so. No,
this,
I mean, you get a whole bunch of pressure. I noticed it this year in archery season. The unit that we were hunting was closed. A lot of it was closed to fires early. And so that concentrated a whole bunch of people early. And in those areas where the people were concentrated early, even when they dispersed later in the season, the elk were pressured from early, and they didn't act the same, and they weren't in the same places. So it makes total sense. If you get a whole bunch of pressure and there's a bunch of elk there, yeah, you might have luck for a day or two, but then those elk change their patterns, and where are they going to go? They're going to go on the private where nobody can access them, and then nobody's going to kill an elk. So you keep them dispersed for a longer period of time, I think your success rates will be higher.
Yeah. And the person I feel sorry for is there was 3 or 4 working ranches there. I was watching them out there moving cows and doing stuff. It's 12 degrees in the morning and the wind's blowing so hard. And here those guys are out there, doing what ranchers do. And I feel bad for them, because I know it's going to happen. As quick as season ends, and there's not vehicles driving up and down the county roads, and there's not folks in orange out there walking around, over time, these elk that right now are on this big sanctuary ranch are going to disperse.
Yeah.
And they're going to go down to these places where the working dude is going to have to put up with them.
Is feeding them.
And he's going to be like, there's too damn many elk here. Someone come and shoot these things. And Game and Fish is going to say, well, we've given unlimited cow tags. What more can we do?
Yep.
So I've concluded that what we really have there is a neighbor problem, not an elk problem. So we got one neighbor who really doesn't care, or maybe he's just unaware. I mean, that when I say he doesn't care, that assigns the motivation. Maybe he just isn't aware of what the consequences are of him allowing all these elk to stack up on his huge ranch. It's a very big ranch. It's, pushing 20,000 acres. And what that does to his neighbor once hunting season is over. His neighbor, who's working that land for a living and isn't a Wall Street tycoon, has a huge impact from this dude who he just, this is part of his portfolio. He flies the private jet out, and the family spends a week or 2 there in the summer and call it good.
Yep.
It's a very complicated situation. I don't have a solution to it.
Well, and it just, we look at private versus public, and that's an argument. There's differences there. We have to balance that, but there's differences in public versus public based on access. There's differences in private versus private based on land use. And so all these different things, like you said, you've got, it's not just checkerboard public private, it's checkerboard private use, private non-use. And so there's so many things there, and you can't force somebody that owns 20,000 acres to open it up to let people hunt the public's wildlife that's on there. It's a refuge for them, and they can control that. So it's, man, I mean, the Fish and Game agencies, it's really easy for us as hunters to sit back and say, right here in my line of sight, right in front of me, this is the problem and this is how they need to fix it. Well, you go over the ridge and the problem's different and it's not the same fix. So Fish and Game agencies really are, it's a balancing act trying to figure out who to keep happiest longest.
Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by Go Hunt Insider. You hear us talk about it, that's because we use it a lot. Go to GoHunt.com to get the best information available to the self-guided hunter. I'm talking the best draw odds, strategy articles, amazing e-scouting tools that we've helped design, online and mobile maps, and the best gear shop in the industry. Sign up for Insider using promo code ELKTALK and get $50 of credit in the Go Hunt gear shop. Go to GoHunt.com and sign up now.
The Elk Talk podcast is also brought to you by Mountain Ops, making outdoor energy and performance nutrition to make you a stronger and healthier elk hunter. They have a full line of hunting-related supplements, including meal replacement shakes, multivitamins, pre-workout fuel, and post-workout recovery. And my favorite, their new performance protein bars that, by the way, are packed with 270 calories and 20 grams of protein, but contain less than 6 grams of sugar. Visit mountainops.com to learn more and to order, and be sure to use the promo code ELKTALK to save on your next order.
Yeah, well, they're under, the game agencies are under a ton of pressure from these working ranchers who, by, season ends late November. So by January, these working ranchers are dealing with a lot of elk. And so they're putting a lot of pressure on Game and Fish. So Game and Fish has got a very small set of tools that they can use, right? They, like you said, they can't force themselves or force public hunting on a 20,000 acre private ranch. So cross that off. The only remaining tool is longer seasons, more cow tags, more hunting pressure. All that does is moves the elk sooner. So some of these places they've experimented, well, let's start the cow season August 15th. So by archery season, they're all, the elk are all on the private ranch again.
Yep.
And
then that creates a whole problem for the general, for the bull hunters and everybody else during archery season. And it just, every move you make has a consequence downstream for somebody else.
Yep. So I throw it out there as what I was observing yesterday when I was trying to keep my hat on and tuck into behind this little rock pile that I was watching all these elk from. And don't get me wrong, it's entertaining still to watch elk, even if they're not accessible where I can go after them. But it gave me a lot of time to just think about how do we come up with solutions. And I don't know what they are. A lot of these private ranchers who don't allow anything. I mean, when I say nothing, they don't lease to an outfitter. They don't lease to a private hunting club.
They don't run cattle.
Right. Or if they run cattle, they run very few, and it's kind of a hobby thing to justify the tax write-off as a rancher. It's way different than their neighbor. And I don't know what that answer is, Corey. I mean, we live in a country, thank God we live in a country that respects private property rights, right? That's a foundation of this entire society we have. But it sure creates some interesting dynamics when the way one person exercises their property right a couple months later has a huge impact on a neighbor and their property.
Yep.
So, but I would like to see the game agencies maybe consider something a little more creative. Maybe there are studies out there. I know there's a study out of BYU about the immediate movement that elk demonstrate in response to the first bit of rifle hunting pressure. and how far they moved. That study to me was pretty revealing and supported what I observe in a lot of these places in Montana. And I know you're in Idaho and Wyoming and Colorado, New Mexico, pretty much everywhere. This problem is becoming more common, not less common, as very wealthy people who may not have the same land, if you want to call it, ethic or community involvement or understanding of the local community. They're going to come in and buy these properties more and more than what they already have. They're probably not inclined to let the public on to hunt. And so this is not a problem that's going away as it relates to elk dispersal and access to elk. So I'd like to see the agencies do some experiments with, would less cow tags actually result in more cow elk harvested and more dispersal of elk across the landscape and result in more bulls also being harvested? Because when the shooting starts, it's not like the bulls stand there and say, oh, they're just shooting at the cows, I'm just going to lay down here. When the shooting starts on a private ranch, all the elk disperse, the bulls and the cows. And that's good for the people hunting the public.
Absolutely.
But
that's what we've noticed. Just, elk going on to private where there's not hunting allowed, they end up just staying there. And so it's not a matter of, they go there after pressure starts in hunting season. It changes where they have their calves in the spring. It changes their whole pattern and the way that they live. And pretty soon, you've got them, maybe they move off, like you said, they might move off of that big private ranch in January or in February, and they might stay on some, lower elevation feed grounds or something, winter grounds for 2 or 3 months. Well, a lot of agencies do their population counts, their surveys from the air in March, April, because they know the elk are concentrated, so it's easier to get a count of the numbers. They're usually going to be out more in the open. It's going to be easier to get the data they're looking for. But then all those elk turn around a month later and they go back on the private and they never leave. So they're basing a lot of hunting seasons off of these over objective numbers. So it's giving more tags, creating more pressure, more competition for hunters, more of a concentration of the hunters. But those elk aren't on public land or in huntable locations during the season. So I think, a lot of frustration, and my own included, comes from the fact that we're still giving out a whole bunch of tags, but we don't have nearly as many huntable elk on huntable properties, public lands that are conducive for that many hunters. So it gets frustrating for hunters. It gets frustrating for the agencies trying to manage it. It gets frustrating for private landowners because their fields are getting tore up by elk. And so it's just, there's not a simple solution, and it's not like one group is benefiting. It's not like somebody's playing favorites and saying, well, we're going to let them benefit off of this because they put more money into this. It's, hands are kind of tied because of the private land.
Yeah. So I don't know how you change that. Is there some way that you could meet with some of these folks and say, hey, we're not here to tell you what you got to do, but we want you to understand that your decisions to keep elk on your property throughout hunting season, that's a decision you have every right to make. But here's how it impacts your neighbors when we have too many elk.
And not just your neighbors, but wildlife in general, too. I think there's some people that are like, I don't care about my neighbor. I got 20,000 acres and I don't even see my neighbor for an hour after I leave the public land road that goes into my property. So not as concerned about them. But I think when we start looking at overall wildlife, and the management of wildlife and the importance of what the agencies do and what hunting does to manage wildlife, I think that's a good educational tool. I think incentivizing some of these landowners, whatever that might be, one of the issues I think that I see is, the ability, especially in areas where it's a draw hunt, for a landowner to get landowner tags and then sell them or sell access for whatever they want to. Again, it's private land. You don't want to restrict commerce, and their ability to use their land to do what they want. But when it comes to wildlife, I think there are some things we could do. And when you have an area where somebody gets, say, 10 landowner tags and they can do what they want with them, and now they're selling them for $20,000 a piece for somebody to come and access this big private ranch, it's not enough hunting pressure to disperse the elk. It's not going to benefit anybody else out there except for that landowner. I think there's got to be a way where we can, hey, if we're going to incentivize you with something that you're going to be able to capitalize on, there's got to be a benefit to the wildlife and the general hunting as well.
Yeah. I think agencies are slowly starting, maybe not slowly, but they are starting to realize that surveying elk or deer, whatever it might be, is one thing, but surveying what are accessible elk for hunting, which is their primary management tool, is a way different process than just counting the total elk in a unit. So, well, if you come up with an answer to that problem, Corey, you probably are going to be very wealthy.
I don't know about that. I think it's really a lot like somebody saying, "Hey, what do elk eat?"
Well, that depends.
In central Idaho, they eat something completely different than they do in eastern Montana. So, being able to identify ecology and habitat and stuff it's difficult, and it changes over a ridge. You go over a ridge and there's something different and something better. And so it's the same. There's not going to be a simple stuff it in the box answer here that's going to work across the board. It's you look, most states are broke down into units, and those units a lot of times coincide with a lot of these variables. That, hey, this area on this side of the mountain has a lot of private, the backside has no access, but it's all public. We have to manage those differently, and we have to look at how we get more people in there, how we kind of navigate through the landscape. And so I even think in Idaho, we've got zones, and within the zones there are 2 or 3 units, and they're really set up to try to say, hey, the elk are similar in these zones, so we can manage them different than across the river or across the mountain range or whatever. But even within zones, there are such massive differences of, access. And we're not just talking elk. When you look at wolf hunting or something, depredation on cattle from wolves is different in one unit than it is in another. And so and then that translates into the elk and how the elk behave, because if there's a lot of cattle in an area, the wolves are going to focus maybe on cattle part of the year, and the elk part of the year where you're in the backcountry and all there are elk to eat, the wolves are going to focus on them. And so it's such a balancing act.
I will admit that you brought that up, wolves. As I'm looking at this group, there's one bull of these 12. He's not broken. I took a picture of him, sent it to one of my friends. He's like, oh my gosh, how big is that thing? I'm like, I don't know, but he would be by far the biggest elk I've ever shot. So I'm sitting there, and this is probably a function of having too much. What do they say, that something about idle time is the devil's workshop or something like that?
Idle hands.
Yeah. I was thinking about, well, this would be a fine time for a pack of wolves to show up over there, but none showed up. Yeah.
You wouldn't have been able to shoot them anyway.
Oh, I wouldn't have shot the wolves. I would have let the wolves chase the elk
onto the public.
Yeah, that was my theory as well. If there aren't any human hunters over there moving those elk around, I guess maybe I should ask for a pack of wolves to show up here. Maybe we need maybe people are going to think I'm getting out of the weeds now, but someone's probably going to email us and say, we need to have some trained packs of wolves to go and hunt those private ranches.
It's amazing the ranches that allow for hunting, how quick they are to allow some government, interference or assistance in trapping or chasing wolves or managing wolves on the private property, because they know it enhances the elk hunting there as well. So
Yeah, but no wolves showed up. So
some of my trail cameras are strategically placed to be able to help me monitor wolves and try to figure them out a little bit better this winter too.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward.
We've getting into technology about having your own robotic pack of wolves. I can't believe my mind is going over there. But we did have a lot of emails about technology in the last week. One person mentioned how far some people shoot, and his suggestion was, well, maybe we should put a limit on what
Magnification.
scopes, objective lens, and magnification can be used. Well, I think if there's one thing we've learned in the hunting space over the last 30 years is it's very difficult to accomplish what you want to accomplish by legislating every piece of technology. I'm not saying that it doesn't have a place, and recently some states have went back to open sights only on muzzle loaders. And they just, they did it because the muzzleloader seasons were established as a primitive weapon season, and now people are shooting 400 yards with a muzzleloader. So I'm not discounting that, but it gets to be really challenging, and I wonder what's more effective is if we just focus on educating hunters on, hey, these are what reasonable shot distances should be. These are, things like that. But it's never going to be a perfect outcome or solution out there.
No, and it's such a slippery slope. I mean, we see, his suggestion was, do we need to limit the power of scopes? Because he sees people holding 50 inches over an animal with a 20 power scope. I'm like, well, that's old technology, because now you just dial the scope right down and hold right on, and make up for that. And so, the technology in scopes definitely makes a difference. But somebody with a 30 power scope that doesn't have an adjustable turret on it isn't going to be all that effective or accurate. And that comes down to, a bigger issue of now we're lobbing shots out there and shooting at an animal at 800 yards. It's across the canyon. And there's no way we're hiking over there and checking to see if there's blood if we don't see the animal drop. And, I've heard several stories this fall of people that, somebody sitting on a ridge across and somebody clear across from them starts shooting at an elk down below them 600 yards, and they walk over and they glass for a few minutes and they turn around, walk back up the ridge and leave. And, the people heard impact at the shot and went down there, and there's a dead bull laying there that they didn't even come and look for, didn't even try to find. And so, I mean, it's, we could argue archery is this, rifles this, but at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to make sure we're making good shots. And technology's made it so that people who don't put in a lot of time practicing can go out to the range and gain a lot of false confidence in their abilities. And then they get out in the field and try to implement that, and it just doesn't work. But limiting scope power, limiting some of that, that's we're too far down the slope to be able to try to start doing that. And that's, we look at, you mentioned legislation. That's the biggest piece of, this. It isn't right to go and legislate things. We've got to do things coming from the sportsmen and from the agencies, because those are the ones that are involved in it. And in Idaho, for years, people have been saying, we need lighted nocks, we need mechanical broadheads, we need this technology in archery. It's not going to change success rates. It's going to improve people being able to find an animal. And I don't disagree or agree. I'm not taking a stance there, but the Fish and Game Agency in Idaho said, listen, if we start allowing technology, it's going to have to be looked at. We're going to have to say success rates are probably going to be impacted. And right now we try to give the most liberal opportunity we can to hunters in Idaho. And if technology gets root, it might impact that opportunity. And so it's always been sportsmen for the most part understand that. And they're like, okay, I get that. I'll sacrifice, one desire here to be able to keep that opportunity. Well, we have a legislator that had a buddy that said, hey, this isn't right. We should do this. So he goes and creates a bill. And before you know it, it gets passed through. And now we have lighted knocks and mechanical broadheads in Idaho. And 2 years later, guess what the agency just had to do? They just created a hunting and advanced technology working group to look at tools to help and ensure that we aren't over harvesting game species and jeopardizing long-term sustainability. And the 3 tools that are on the board are equipment restrictions, season timing and length, and number of tags issued.
Wow.
So within 2 years of somebody saying, I've got a really good idea, even though nobody might agree with it or the experts don't agree with it, now we have to look at maybe losing some of our seasons, maybe reducing tags, maybe going from an over-the-counter opportunity to a controlled hunt. And so it's just, we have to be so careful of just blindly going in and saying, well, this isn't going to change anything, but it just opens a door and that slope becomes really slippery.
Yeah. And I think there's no doubt that hunters, with the tools and technologies they have today, and I don't care if it's the tool in your hand, your digital maps, sharing of information, the internet. If you look at what was available to elk hunters 25 years ago compared to what they have available to them today, four-wheelers and performance clothing, and you can't hardly find a bow or a rifle setup that isn't lethal. You'd have to go out of your way to find one that is bad. You take that cumulative pile, and the ability for hunters to be successful in the field has been improved by that.
Yeah.
So when game agencies determine how many tags they're going to issue, they say, okay, here's the allowable harvestable surplus. We know we have some rate of success. So applying that rate of success, if we want 100 bulls taken, here's how many tags we can issue. Well, if the success rate gets higher and higher and higher, the number of tags they can issue gets less and less and less, because all of these things work as moving parts of the same piece of the same puzzle.
Yep.
And so it's interesting that your agency has identified those 3 things: tag numbers, season length and timing, and technology. Those are probably 3 very big pieces I'd throw in there. The other one might be access, but your agency's probably smart enough to realize that, you know what, throwing access in there, we're not going to force ourselves onto a lot of these private ranches. So let's focus on the 3 things we have some say over. But
Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by the University of Elk Hunting. The University of Elk Hunting was founded by Corey Jacobson. It is now part of the suite of courses out there at outdoorclass.com. So if you want to sign up for the University of Elk Hunting and save some money, go out to outdoorclass.com and use Elk Talk as your promo code, and you'll get 20% off. But more importantly, you're going to get the University of Elk Hunting. You're going to get other courses from Outdoor Class taught by Corey Jacobson, Remy Warren, Randy Newberg, John Barklow, Hank Shaw, Jamie Teagan, and on and on and on. There you have it. OutdoorClass.com will get you the University of Elk Hunting. Just make sure you use promo code ElkTalk and save 20%. The Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by Yeti. You've seen we've been using the Yeti Loadout Go Box a ton since they came out a few years ago. We've found dozens of uses for the Go Box to keep our gear organized and protected. Whether it's the 15, the 30, or the 60, the Go Box is waterproof, dustproof, and close to bomb-proof. To find out more, go to Yeti.com or your preferred Yeti retailer.
you
The
know,
good news is they created this working group out of sportsmen, so it's got a
okay,
good representation. I think there's like 15 people on the group. They're from all parts of the state, so we talk about differences. Nobody's going to be shooting 1,000 yards with a rifle in some areas in Idaho. It's gonna you can't see more than 60 yards in those areas, so they're going to bring a different perspective than somebody in some of the desert landscape where you can see a lot farther. And so it is good. They're sportsmen. They have a vested interest in the wildlife, in the opportunity, in the outcome. And I think it'll be a diverse enough group that, again, we might come back and we've got an agency that says, hey, our group came back with these suggestions. Here's what we want to do. It still has to go through the legislative process. And
yeah,
it might get shot down, even though this group recommends it, even though our Game and Fish Commission recommends it, even though our agency recommends it. It still has to go through a legislative process and pass there. And so, I think if nothing else, it at least gives us an opportunity to explore and to educate and be able to say, hey, this isn't working, and we're going to lose more opportunity if we as hunters don't start making the right decisions in the field. And that's, what it really comes down to. And for me, I love the thrill of getting as close to a screaming bull elk as I can. I mean, that for me, archery hunting, some of the most exhilarating and just memorable experiences I've had have been those up close, in your face, a bull at 7 yards stopping and bugling in your face right before you shoot him, or maybe you don't even get a shot. But that I don't want to take away from somebody that, practices with their bow all the time and wants to shoot at 70 yards. I mean, yes, I certainly don't condone that. And I think that there's a limit that we all have to recognize individually, but then also there's a limit where just an arrow's not going to get there fast enough in one step and it's a wounded or a lost elk. And so there's just, we can't start saying, well, it's illegal to shoot an elk over 50 yards, because that's not going to work. But
no,
if we educate, especially new hunters, and say, listen, go and shoot your bow 100 times and move back 10 yards and shoot your bow 100 times, does your group increase in size? Yes, it's going to. That's the equipment we use. Go back another 10 yards, and are you starting to scatter everywhere? Okay, you found your effective range. Don't ever allow yourself to take a shot farther than that. That's just, I think helping people understand what their effective range really is in a hunting situation. Because I've heard, I mean, you and I both, we go to shows and people come up and they're like, the bull, whirled at the shot, and, it was 60 yards frontal. I'm like, whoa, the bull didn't whirl at the shot. That's not a good shot for anybody to be taking. And, so they just sometimes, I think, get so excited to have an opportunity, and there's so much pressure on them to be successful, whether that's pressure from social media, from themselves, from a hunting, whatever it is, that they're willing to do things that they probably deep down know that isn't the best idea. And education is there's still going to be people that go and do things that maybe aren't best for wildlife and for the general hunting population, but we can't lock down things to the point where we're not allowing that to happen, because that takes away opportunity from all of us.
Yeah. Well, we we have a legislative session. You were talking about how some legislators got in the mix in Idaho and mucked things up. Well, I think no matter what state somebody's in, their legislature's probably mucking things up. And here we are. The election is a couple weeks behind us. And in Montana, we meet for 90 days every 2 years. And like I always say, I wish we met for 2 days every 90 years. But there's a bill tracker on the Montana legislature website. I just went there while you were talking because I wanted to see how bad our legislature is going to muck it up. If you type in hunting, there's already 17 bills in there related to hunting.
Wow.
Most of them are going to take power away from the commission and invest it in the legislature, which we all know what happens when the legislature gets involved. And after Thanksgiving, December is when most of the bills drop. So if we already have 17 of them in there to change our hunting laws, I can't even imagine how many we will have before the session starts in early January. And
It's just, I mean, one state, 17 hunting related legislative issues. This isn't game agency issues they're looking at or public comment or anything. These are things that somebody sitting in a seat there decided, I'm going to add this to a bill somewhere and see if I can get this pushed through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But oh well. I I don't even know what you say. It's just the way legislatures now think that they are the answer to these problems. It just it is accelerating at a stunning pace, and it's unfortunate that so many hunters who have a connection to a legislator will go to that legislator, say, "Hey, man, I was supporting you. I donated to your cause. I want this bill." And we end up with some of the craziest stuff, not just in the states we live in. I'm talking about across the country.
Yeah.
Like, this is a dumb one. People know I grew up in Minnesota and I love beaver trapping. Minnesota passed through their budget act that you can eat beaver that are caught on public land, but not beaver that are caught on private land. No, who in the is like, that is a legislature there. That's evidence of who gets elected into legislatures. Okay, we got a beaver problem in this state that's causing millions and millions of dollars of property and road damage, but we're gonna worry about you can eat them if you caught them on public land, but you can't eat them if you caught them on a landowner damage permit. It's like, really? So I use that as an example that it's not just in the states you and I live in. Wherever you are listening from, folks, you need to be tracking what your legislature is doing, because they are going to be doing some crazy stuff. And
that's one of those things that remind you of like the weirdest laws in each of the states. There's a state that you can't get married in a horse buggy on Saturday after 1 o'clock or something. It's just these, where did this even come from? And what good did they think it was possibly going to do? But I mean, I think every state has something that we scratch our heads at, but it's because usually somebody that really didn't know what they were doing decided that they wanted to do that.
Yeah. So, point of all that, folks, be paying attention. Bookmark your state legislative website and be checking in on that. And whether you voted for the person or didn't vote for the person, whatever, if they come up with a dumb idea, give them the raspberries. Let them know. Yes. I'm just dumbfounded. I always say that, because every state legislature will be in session in 2025. I don't think there's any state that has an open session, is not in session in 2025. Even the biennial states like Montana. And when legislatures are in session, your wildlife, your guns, and your hunting privileges are not safe. That's just a blanket statement that has been proven correct time and time again by these legislators. So be on the lookout, folks, and don't be bashful. You voted for these people. Let them know it. You might have voted for them on this issue or that issue, but you certainly didn't vote for them to take away your gun, your shooting, your hunting, your wildlife funding. So
the other thing we see sometimes is it's hidden in another bill. Like it's put in as a rider. So you've got somebody that's trying to get support from his other fellow legislators, and he's got somebody that's resisting it, that he knows if he can get them on board, it's going to pass. and they have something that they want. So they say, I'll tell you what, you add this as a rider to the end of that, and I'll be okay with it. That way mine gets passed if yours gets passed. And so there's going to be, some off the wall hunting or, gun right type of a thing added in to something that's, related to a grocery tax or something completely unrelated. And we're looking at it going, oh, it's a grocery tax bill. Yeah, that makes sense. And then it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why is this even in there? And they sneak things through like that all the time. It just doesn't get the attention because it's a rider on something that might be a bigger mainstream issue or something. But yeah, I don't know if every state, I'm sure they all have a website that lists topics. I don't know if they're as navigable as Montana where you can search by keyword or not. But I think there are probably, especially on big things, just be involved in, find a way to find out about these things.
Yeah, sign up for an email list or, whatever your state wildlife agency or, a group that advocates for hunters and anglers in your state, just sign up for their email list. And you'll get alerts. You'll probably get so many of them during the legislative session. You'll be like, oh, man, why did I sign up for this email? But anyhow, we did have one guy who talked about observing that he ran into a lot of elk because he was hiking, and he was surprised based on how busy it was with ATVs and other stuff zooming up and down the roads. And he admitted that he uses an ATV to get to the trailhead. He said once he started hiking, he didn't hardly see anybody. And his question was, do you think that with all these modern conveniences we now have, has it taken the edge off the skill in woodsmanship or woodswomanship, whichever you want to call it, of the average hunter? I don't know. I know some young people who are pretty darn good at it and really get after it. So I don't know that it's any different than it was back when Grandpa was hunting. They probably sat around and said, yeah, old Joe there, all he does is sit on a stump, smoke a cigarette, and wait for one to come by. No wonder he doesn't shoot anything, So I don't know that it has. I really don't have that answer, but you do hear it a lot. A lot of people say, oh, I wonder how we killed so many big mule deer when all we had was a 30-30 with open sights. And was it just because there were a lot more big mule deer, or was it that those guys were just supreme hunters and woodsmen? Could make a case for either. But we get a similar comment to that every so often, that people think that, we get some comments that say so much technology has made people just absolute predators and over exploits the resource. And then we get some people who comment or observe, and I think both of them, it's their observation, and since it's their observation, there's no right or wrong. Then we get some who say, you know what, all this technology has made these guys a bunch of lily-livered lick splits. So
yeah, and I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle there.
Probably.
No, I mean, it's, ATVs talking, we talk ATVs, and that goes back to technology as well, that, gives us an opportunity to get in farther and has an impact on wildlife. And what is the impact? And, I grew up riding motorcycles, not as a hunting tool, but just as another hobby. And then when you can combine the two, it's like, man, I can ride a motorcycle. I'm, fairly confident on a motorcycle. It can get me in another 8 miles on some nasty trails where the only other people that are going to be going in that far are on horses or with llamas or something. And if it's an open motorized trail, I'll take advantage of something like that. But a couple of years ago, we were sitting on a hillside watching 4 bulls. It was really early in September. Might even still been August. They were still kind of bachelored up. The rut hadn't kicked in yet, and we're kind of watching to see where they go and bed down. And we can hear 2 miles down the canyon, 2 motorcycles coming up, and they weren't hunters. They were just riding a motorized trail. And as soon as the elk heard those motorcycles, they turned and ran for the top of the mountain like they were going to get shot if they didn't leave immediately. And so it kind of made me realize there is an impact. I knew there was an impact, but sometimes, you can ride right up on animals, but we saw there that they weren't even taking a chance and going out, and there's nothing. I mean, open motorcycle trail, they weren't doing anything illegal at all.
Right.
And so you have to say, hey, if I'm going to hike in 2 miles on a motorcycle trail and then motorcycles come riding by legally, that's on me for choosing that motorcycle trail to hunt next to.
Yeah.
But with that, now I've been riding an electric motorcycle the last couple of years, and I've gotten some comments there that this is almost cheating. Is this even fair chase? Now they can't hear you coming. And it's like, well, I think, I would rather go in quietly and not impact them and be able to hunt and get in there. And, horses are quiet. Where do we draw the line with technology and all that? And so,
yeah, I mean, I've been using a side-by-side some this year because I just got tired of tearing my truck apart.
yeah,
And so I get it. I mean, I'm never going to drive it where it's not allowed, and I'm going to follow all the motorized rules and everything. And I think most people do that.
Yeah.
That's what most people do. But I'm also fully aware that whether it's my truck or whether it's a side-by-side, if an elk hears that, they're going to think, I'm not sure. I might want to walk out of here or run out of here. Or,
Yeah.
So it just is a consequence of how we decide to do some of these things. So,
Yep.
this one, I don't know. Maybe we need to do an entire podcast on this one.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Well, at least tease us with it.
It's an update on Utah asking the U.S. Supreme Court. They filed a lawsuit.
BLM.
Asking the U.S. Supreme Court to declare that it is unconstitutional for the federal government to own the quote-unquote unappropriated lands within the boundaries of Utah, which a lot of people, like I'm a small government guy, lower taxes, right? I want all the more, I don't know what you'd call it, in basic concept, I agree with, I prefer things to be at the county level versus the state if possible, and at the state versus the feds if possible. But you really got to walk through what this would do, if Utah won, because now I think 14 other attorney generals have signed off, including a bunch of the Wyoming legislature has pushed it even further and saying, we don't want just the unappropriated lands. We want all federal lands. We want them handed over to us. So if we walk through some of that, you cannot do recreational shooting on state land. So you and I live in the two most friendly states in terms of the policies on the use of state lands. Idaho and Montana, we're allowed to do a lot of things on our state lands that you can't do in most other states. So let's take recreational shooting. California, no recreational shooting on state lands. Okay, that's 40 some million acres of public lands that we lose to recreational shooting. Arizona, no recreational shooting on state lands. So what do we lose there? Well, we're going to lose a lot in Arizona to recreational shooting. Let me see. Where's the acreage? I had the acreage here somewhere. I think Arizona's 27 or 28 million. So what does that mean? Well, that means we're going to lose an awful lot of shooting opportunity. Okay.
Now, when you talk recreational shooting, you're talking going out and setting up a target, going back to 100 yards and sighting in your rifle, going out and setting up some pop cans and shooting with a 22 pistol. You can't do that on state land in Arizona or California.
Or New Mexico or Colorado or Nevada.
Can you hunt on those state lands? So you can discharge a firearm on those state lands?
You can't in Colorado.
See, and so that would be incredibly scary to me. If they can limit you that you can't shoot a firearm on state lands for recreational shooting, what's stopping them from saying you can't shoot a firearm on state lands for hunting?
There's nothing stopping them.
Yeah, you can hunt all you want, but you can't shoot a rifle there.
Right.
There's nothing, and they've already got a foot in the door by limiting recreational shooting. What's going to be next?
Right. Yeah. So I just want people to walk through this stuff and say, okay, what does this mean for me? Because California has 40 million acres of federal land. New Mexico has almost 23 million acres of federal land. Arizona has 30 million acres almost of federal land.
How much does Colorado have?
Colorado has 23.5 million acres of federal land.
100 of state land?
They have 2.9 million acres of state land.
And state land is completely off limits for hunting in
Colorado? Everything in Colorado, unless the Game and Fish Agency comes and leases it from the state land board. So a lot of people don't understand that in the West, we still have state land boards that manage state lands that are different from wildlife management areas. They manage state lands for the school systems. Now, a lot of the Midwest states, a lot of the East, Southeast states, when they got admitted to the Union, they just flat out sold their land, put it in a trust account, and that's what they manage. They now manage the cash or the investments that came from those state. The reason they call them state trust lands is in the late 1700s, I think it was when Ohio became a state. It was part of what's called the Northwest Ordinance. It said, we're going to give every state 2 out of the 36 sections in a township that they should lease, rent, whatever, for funding of their school systems. Well, a lot of states just said, screw it, we're selling that land to homesteaders, and we'll put the money in an account, and that's what will fund our school systems. Well, a lot of the Western states didn't do that. They still hold the lands, but they hold them under these land boards, which manage them for a profit for the school. So these land boards and the legislatures set the laws of what's allowed on those lands. And they're not very friendly to recreational shooting. Hardly, other than your state and my state, a lot of them heavily restrict recreational shooting on state land. So for all of us who rightfully got upset at the Biden administration for closing off 1.3 million acres in the Bears Ear National Monument to recreational shooting for no reason at all, that was stupid. And a lot of us let them know that. Well, that's 1.3 million acres. That's a lot. But if I add up California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, I come up with 130 million acres are going to be off limits to recreational shooting. 100 times that. So where's the outcry?
And that is if federal land is taken over by state control.
Right. Yep, exactly. Under the current laws that these states have. And do you think a state like California, state like New Mexico, state like Arizona even, that they're going to change their law and say, oh, if we get these lands, we're going to let everybody go shoot?
Not only that, but what do they want those lands for? How are they going to manage those lands?
Well, they're not.
You give them 20 million acres, all they see is a dollar sign behind it. And it's not going to be public access land forever in the same quantities that it is. Not only that, but think about wildfires.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Think about the millions of dollars that it takes every year in the West to fight wildfires.
Right.
States don't have those budgets. Even if they have that land, they're going to sell it and they're going to use the money, and then they're going to be like, well, now what do we do?
Right. So let's take a couple other states that have some quirky restrictions. New Mexico, Wyoming, and Colorado do not allow camping on public lands. So let's just
on state-owned public lands.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry. Yeah. Let me make sure I'm clear. Their state land boards do not allow you to go and camp on their state lands So if in New Mexico, almost 23 million acres of federal lands went to that state land board. In Colorado, over 23 million went there. In Wyoming, over 30 million. So we add all that together. That just those three states are 75 million acres of land you can currently camp on for hunting.
Because it's federal land.
Right.
Currently. Yeah.
When it went to the state, boom, done. You're not doing that anymore. So what does that mean? Let's walk through what that means. I have hunted some of the places in western New Mexico where you have to go and camp because the nearest town, Daddle or Quamato or Reserve or Socorro, they're a 2-hour drive away from a lot of the glory elk hunting in the Gila. So what does everybody do? They go and camp out there. It's dispersed camping out on the Forest Service. Well, you're not going to be able to do that anymore.
Yeah. And I've firsthand camped with Randy, and we had to camp 30 minutes away from where we wanted to hunt because we wanted to hunt on state land, but there's no camping allowed there. So we had to drive 30 minutes to the nearest federal land to be able to camp and then drive 30 minutes just to get into the area we wanted to hunt every day because there's no camping allowed on that public land in New Mexico.
Right. So how are you going to do those hunts in New Mexico, right? You're going to have to rent a hotel. Maybe we should set up little hotels in Reserve and Quamato and Daddle and Pie Town and everything else. And you're going to have to drive out there every day. You're going to have to find some place to park, and you're going to have to hike in. You're not setting up a backpack camp because you can't camp there. You're going to have to hike out every day and drive back to your hotel in Pie Town. The same thing applies in Wyoming, right? Wyoming does not let you camp on their state lands. So think about all of the mule deer hunting in Region G and Region H of the Wyoming range in western Wyoming. I've done that. What do? You drive there, you park at a trailhead, and you hike back 6-8 hours, and you set up a backcountry camp. You aren't allowed to do that if these lands end up in Wyoming state control. You're going to have to drive from Bondurant or from Daniels or from Alpine or Jackson, drive to a parking lot every morning, hike in your 6 hours to where the deer are, and then hike out 6 hours and repeat that process every day because Wyoming doesn't let you camp on those lands you currently can camp on. All this great general Wyoming elk tag, how many people go and camp out on federal lands for those general elk tags in Wyoming? The majority of people, whether you're a resident or non-resident. You aren't doing that anymore. How are you going to do that elk hunt?
Yeah. Well, just looking through here, in Wyoming's brief, their legislators could extend their claims to all former federal territorial lands now held by the United States, including parks, monuments, wilderness, etc. So now they're going to use their small budget to manage Yellowstone, to manage the entire wilderness in the state of Wyoming.
Yeah, and we're talking about a state that currently doesn't let non-residents hunt wilderness areas.
Yeah, and now they want to manage all federal lands, not just the wilderness, but all public lands. They want it managed by the state.
Yeah. So I could go on and on and on, but the point of this is all of us get frustrated with how federal lands are managed. And Congress could change any law that results in our frustrations. But there are people in Congress who don't want to solve the frustrations of federal land